Good morning, good morning. Wow, what a great start to the conference. It's so wonderful to see you all back here today. Wasn't yesterday a great set of conversations? We covered the waterfront, from health to women to programs to solutions. Well, today we're starting off talking about money. Doesn't that sound like a good topic? So this session is designed to really talk about not just the retirement income crisis, and we know we have shortfalls in people preparing for retirement and now living in retirement, but it's about real solutions, things that are actionable and directions we can take. So to start, I'm going to put up a slide to sort of frame the situation. And we really do have many forces at play. We talked about so many of them yesterday. It's not just the lack of retirement preparedness, financial education, et cetera, but it's the rising health costs, health crisis, aging population, and let's face it, we're all living longer. So when you have those forces at play really come together, at the heart of it, we got to have the conversation about money, about retirement savings, about those who are underserved and really don't have it, but also the millions and millions of people who are working hard, saving hard, and are going to have a huge gap as they age. So let's put a couple of statistics in front of us so we can talk a little bit about the conversation we're framing today. First of all, 80 million Americans, once the boomers matriculate into retirement. We're at the peak. We call it peak 65 because we're in the middle of the boomers crossing over. So that means there's 30 million more that are still in retirement readiness. 4 million turning 65 every year and 12 million every day. That is a huge number of people and coming into an already stressed system. That's our reality. We're going to talk later about the generations behind this because this isn't just a set of solutions for today. It's a set of solutions that have to be scalable and durable for today and for tomorrow. Secondly, hey, we're all living longer. That's the good news. If you retire at 65 today, you're probably going to live on an average of 17 more years. And, you know, centurions are going to quadruple in the next 25 years. My mother just turned 99 last week. Yes, women are living longer. So that's a whole part of this conversation. And the third thing is about our money. Now, when you look at a number like $259,000, a lot of people will say, and that's the median savings across Americans today. Say, wow, that's a lot of money. I know so many people that you serve that have nothing or close to nothing. But think about when you start to translate this bubble of people coming into the retirement space, living longer, $259,000 translates to $16,000 a year and $1,300 a month, unadjusted for inflation. So if you think about that and Social Security and where we stand with those resources as we go forward, that's not necessarily income replacement if you are living longer and if you're living one crisis away from depleting your savings. So that's all part of this narrative and part of setting up framing today. So I am lucky enough to have this fabulous panel, and I'd like to introduce them, starting with Jason Fichtner, who is the chief economist for the Bipartisan Policy Center. He's also a colleague of mine on the Alliance for Lifetime Income as he runs our fellows program for additional research and thought leadership for that program. We're going to hear from him. Haleh Nazeri is the lead for longevity and economy of the World Economic Forum. She's a very prominent figure in the Davos conversations, and you're going to hear a lot about her perspective on the public-private partnership as we have conversations around solutions. Radpour is an assistant professor at Stockton University. I just told him I taught there too in my younger days. We just had a little connection. And he is going to talk about some of the research that he has recently surfaced on this topic, looking at the individual versus institutions. And then last but not least, Elizabeth White, entrepreneur, author, storyteller, advocate, and someone that's lived it, that started in a place and ended in a place that she never thought about. And we're going to hear her story and how her lessons are informing others. So without further ado, I'm going to come over to the chair here, and we'll start our conversation with, I think, Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you if I can. When I met Elizabeth, and I have to say, her book is called 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal. I was like, I have to hear this. I'm an Audible person, so I downloaded it and started it. And so I got to hear her story in her voice. So tell us a little more about your story and how that story translates into some of the solutions that have to be addressed for today.
So I'm someone who has all the props and credentials, Harvard MBA, Master's in International Studies, worked at the World Bank, and I'm 70 now. In my mid-50s, I stepped on a banana peel. And two really great consultancies that I had, I lost both of them at the same time, and income went to zero. Not worried, because of the background I have. I've never struggled to find work, and my phone wasn't ringing. And women talked. Another good friend of mine, she was an Emmy Award-winning producer, her phone not ringing. Somebody else who had been a very senior contractor in government, her phone not ringing. So I wrote an essay describing what it was like to land here. And the essay went viral with thousands of people responding, "Me too." And that "Me too," it surprised me, because I'm thinking, you're embarrassed when this happens to you. You think you're the only one. And thousands of people saying, this is my brother, my husband, my sister, why are we not having this conversation? And I have the background to look at the data, and looked at the data, which you've heard some of it today, and this is a systemic problem. It gets framed in our culture often as about bad character rather than bad policies. We're told that the retirement income crisis mainly affects low-income workers and a few middle-class bad apples who landed here because of poor planning and irresponsible behavior. And as long as our both private and public policy is focused on this as a moral shortcoming and not the systemic factors, then we're not going to see the kind of bold, game-changing programs and policies we need to change it. And I'll stop.
Thank you. Sia, let me come over to you. Your research focuses on the retirement systems, the wealth, the income inequities, the effect on well-being. My question to you is, I'd like you to talk a little bit about your research and why this crisis isn't just individual failings, but rather systematic failings.
So I have been conducting research on these issues for the past 10 years, starting as a PhD student and now continuing after graduation. And we know the system has many issues. One of the biggest issues is that at any point, almost half of the workers do not have access to retirement plans. And we also know that if workers don't have access to their workplace, and if there is not a generous match, a real incentive for them to save for retirement, they won't do that. It's complex. I tried to open an IRA for myself 5 years ago. And I had a hard time to navigate it. There are so many options, so many choices. Even I had a hard time to navigate the system. So it's not that easy. Even for those who manage to save a little bit for retirement, they experience shocks after shocks, unemployment, many other issues. And we tend to look at these retirement savings these days as emergency funds because they don't have real emergency funds. So they have to tap into their retirement savings, which further depletes these accounts. So what's the result? We have a huge population not prepared for retirement. The $260,000 that you showed is for people who do have some savings. Many people don't have any. So if you look at the whole population of households 55 to 64 near retirement, the median is somewhere around $20,000, which is nothing. Yes, some of them have pension plans. We don't look at them, so you include them. Still, a huge population with no savings at all. Around 15% have absolutely nothing to rely on in retirement. The consequence, they have to work longer, but that's not really an option for many people. After age 50, only half of workers manage to stay employed continuously. They experience periods of unemployment, and some of them drop out much earlier than they plan to. Half of workers retire involuntarily because health shocks, because family responsibility, because they lose their jobs, they can't find a new one, they give up. So half of retirements are unplanned because of these issues. And those who stay because they don't have the backdrop of a retirement account, savings, they have to accept jobs that are not paying well, jobs that are physically challenging. They put their health at risk. And these are not jobs that we want our older population to have. We want them to have the option to work when they want to in good jobs, good paying jobs, healthy jobs, and retire when they want to and when they need to. So we want to empower workers. The first step for that is to make sure everybody has access to retirement plan and everybody is benefiting from the incentives. The way we are using the retirement system right now, the incentives that we give people, it works for some people. For those who have stable jobs, high incomes, they benefit from the tax relief they receive. For many people, they don't work at all. They face the penalties instead. So we have a system that creates winners and losers. We don't want that. We don't want to play lottery with our retirement system. Right now, retirement wealth inequality is much higher than income inequality. So all the inequities that we have in labor market are concentrated in this retirement system. We want something more equitable, something that assures people will have a secure retirement.
Thank you, and that leads me over to you, Jason, because it's a great springboard to continue that conversation from Sia's research, especially if we think about this cohort coming into, the boomer cohort coming into retirement, where a good percentage of them no longer had the traditional pension structure, but now are on, it's a make it on your own. It's a savings type program, whether it's a 401k or 403b, whatever it is. So with that backdrop, I've often heard you say, make income become the outcome. What do you mean by that, and how do you put that into perspective in this conversation?
Thank you, Connie. And first of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. Let me start by sort of putting this in context. I'm sure most people might remember the metaphor of the three-legged stool of retirement. Three-legged stool becomes something that's stable. And the idea is when you think about retirement and the income that is generated in retirement that allows people to maintain their standard of living, pay their bills, it generally came from three sources. About 1/3 was from Social Security. It's designed to replace about 40% of someone's income for the average American, but again, for lower income people, it's a higher replacement rate. For upper income people, it's a lower replacement rate. But this is, think about it as being 1/3. The second leg was designed to be your employer-provided defined benefit pension plan. You got a paycheck when you worked, you got a paycheck when you retired. Now you have two income sources that are basically guaranteed, Social Security and a pension. But that pension now is a defined contribution plan. The third leg was individual savings. So if each is designed to replace 1/3 of your income in retirement, think about how stable that leg is and that stool is, but now it's unstable if things are wobbly. So let's just take these three again. Social Security. I'm sure all of you stayed up very late last night reading the Social Security and Medicare trustees reports that came out yesterday. So I did. The snapshot is that for the retirement program, the depletion date is unchanged from last year at 2033. Keep in mind, 2033 is less than 10 years away. By law, Social Security has no borrowing authority. Congress has to take action. They have to do something, and the president at the time will have to sign something. If they do not, then benefits will get cut about 20 or 21% across the board. That is the default. It's not like a fiscal cliff where taxes are increased. The default is a benefit cut if no action is taken. So that Social Security leg is wobbly. What's the financing shortfall? Right now, the net present value, meaning how much money would I have to put in the bank today to finance the gap between what payroll taxes come in and what we want to schedule to pay in benefits? I'd have to put $22 or $23 trillion in the bank today to let it grow to make up that gap. We've already got a $34 trillion gap right now of debt in our nation's debt. So we're adding on to it. I know I throw around these big numbers like trillion. What is $1 trillion? I'm sure every one of you has a $100 bill in your wallet right now. If you had a stack of $100 bills that equal $10,000, it'd be about a half-inch thick. $1 million worth of hundreds could fit in my backpack that's sitting over there. For all you know, I've got $1 million in that backpack. What is $1 trillion of $100 bills? It is basically 2 construction pallets stacked high that cross an entire football field.
I thought you were going to say it filled the room, but it sounds like it busts out the doors.
It fills a football field, and that's just $1 trillion. We owe $34 trillion, and that's not including the unfunded liability of Social Security. So Social Security's leg is wobbly. The defined benefit plan, basically about 4% of people have access now to a defined pension in private sector, but some people like me have a hybrid. I have a 401k and I have a government pension from my earlier federal service. So it's like a hybrid, but that's kind of changing. Most people coming in now to retirement aren't going to have a pension. The generation that's following, we're calling them the 401k generation. They have a defined contribution plan. But remember that DB plan was supposed to provide a paycheck when you retired. Now that defined contribution plan has to generate income, and this is where income becomes the outcome. And we've got to think about changing the narrative now about how we take Social Security with your defined contribution plan and turn some of that assets into income on top of Social Security, because it's got to replace about a third, one-third. And now you get to personal savings, which, as Sia already said, is basically woefully undersaved for most people. Again, there's an average and the median. For really wealthy off people, they're doing great. For those at the lower end, not so much, and the middle class is stretched too. So we really have to think about this, to Elizabeth's point, it's not just people who made bad decisions. The system has now changed. So we need to think about how we help change the system so that income is the outcome, and how financial planners and advisors help advise people now to make that the focus when we get to retirement and also start planning for retirement.
The system clearly has a problem today, but when we think about stretching that over future generations, we got to make sure it's not a snowball that just gets bigger and bigger, and we're going to have that conversation a little bit later here. But first, let me talk to Haleh, and thank you for joining us. And you sit in a very unique seat, because given your role with the World Economic Forum and with Davos, you really do bring together the public and the private sector in different kinds of conversations. So why don't you talk a little bit about those conversations and what you're focused on and what can be solved by bringing those two together through education and through action?
Sure. I want to start actually with Elizabeth casually dropping that she's 70. I mean,
It's a martini a day, right?
talk about goals. So I kind of can't get over that to begin with. So I am with the World Economic Forum, which most people think is just Davos, but we actually run all sorts of initiatives in 10 of our centers, and my center is financial and monetary systems. So I work with the banks, the insurers, the asset managers, the private investors. And what we do is we think that the most important conversation is a multi-stakeholder conversation. And all that means is you can't just have this conversation that we're having today with just government officials in the public sector. But you also can't just talk to business and the private sector. I think you also need academia in the room to kind of tell us where we're going wrong. You need nonprofits like the NCOA in the room to kind of guide us along the way and tell us what real people are thinking. And you need kind of everyone from the global public sector. So we have the WHO working on this initiative. We have the European Commission and hearing from them. We have members of the Social Security Administration, and it just makes for a much deeper and richer conversation. And the other thing that we try to do is look at this much more holistically, because you can't just look at the retirement income crisis in a vacuum. It is a bigger issue that impacts us in a variety of ways. What I like to say is that this is a global issue that we're dealing with, and that nobody's really quite ready for it. This idea that half of children born today will live to be 100. Companies aren't ready for it. They don't know really how to deal with a multi-generational workforce that's 5 generations working side by side. There's still a lot of ageism out there that they haven't addressed and don't really know how to address. Businesses don't know how the financial sector doesn't quite know what to do with it quite yet. They're trying to figure out solutions. Governments aren't ready for this big demographic transition. And most importantly, individuals aren't, which is what we're talking about today. But here's my biggest point that I'd like to make. The onus isn't on the individual to figure this out on this own. This is a huge global issue. We don't expect individuals to figure out climate change, which is another big global issue. But here we are, not here literally, but around the world talking about this is what you need to do in order to be ready for a 20-year retirement. And that's just not fair. Nobody can do that on their own. So that's why we think it's so critical to have everyone in the room talking. So while government might not have all the solutions with Social Security, the private sector really does want to help, specifically financial services institutions. They're really out there trying to provide for their customers. So where I really like to think we need to come together is have everyone in the room to try to come up with these solutions.
That is a very, very wise set of advice. And building on that, I'd like to move to, for our full panel, to the next topic, which is on generations. I talked about 80 million Americans, the largest cohort, boomers matriculating into retirement, living in retirement longer. 40 million Xers behind it. But then there's another 80 million individuals as part of the millennials, and we're not going to go beyond that at this point. That's a barbell. Think about that. That's a barbell, and it's lumpier and different than anything we've ever seen historically in terms of population. So you're right. This is something that is going to take many of us to solve. And if we think about the generations, the decisions we make today will inform tomorrow. So addressing what's here now, but addressing the policies that get us tomorrow are key. So let's open this conversation, this lens up. Jason, I'm going to start with you, and then I'd like to have others jump in. We've heard a couple of really important points about the workplace and how that's got to change, how COVID has frankly changed it forever. So that even puts an accelerator around it, where Americans are going to be working longer, working differently, moving in and out of different areas. We've talked about the three-legged stool, which is very real, and yet, if you think about those that are underserved, particularly women, 82% of women, this comes out of the NCOA study, who are at the lower levels of income, feel like they can't possibly save. So that affects both retirement savings and personal savings. So how do you even get the stool started? So let's go through the generations, because this is a generational conversation. Starting with you, Jason, and some of your points of view about the impacts of decisions today for today and tomorrow.
So Connie likes the metaphor of a barbell. I've put so much time and research into branding Peak 65 that I got to stay on the peak metaphor. So the Peak 65.
We like both.
I know.
It's okay. It's all
So
good.
The Peak 65, why this is so important is thinking about, again, 4.1 million Americans are turning 65 this year through 2027. 11,200 a day on average. By 2030, all boomers will be 65 or older. Also in 2024, we have peak millennial. They are actually the largest demographic group, a little bit bigger, about a million more than the boomers, that are a little bit about 30 plus years behind. So think about this as a moving system. The things we do today are going to affect those 30 years behind, and of course those in the middle too. And the reason this is so important is because I talk to a lot of young people. They're like, Social Security, I believe in aliens more than I believe in Social Security is going to be there for me. And I have to keep reminding that if we, of course, reduce benefits, that's going to impact them. I mean, they've got to save more on their own to make up that income challenge. If we raise taxes, who's that going to fall on more? The younger generation. So I am not 70, but I'm going to find out her secret when we get off stage. But I turned 53 this summer. In less than 10 years, I'll be eligible for Social Security benefits at 62. That is the year the trust funds are scheduled to be depleted. At that point, if they raise payroll taxes, it might not be my problem. It'll be the younger generation's problem who has to pay for me. So they better care. And this gets in the idea of we're thinking about generational equity. We want to make sure that people pay in and get what they get paid back out, so there's some sort of equity. We need to consider those changes today because the longer we wait, the bigger the magnitude has to be to make the impact necessary to get into balance. And that includes whether we talk about 401ks, we talk about Social Security, healthcare decisions. The Medicare trust fund is going to be depleted now in 2035, I believe, maybe 2036. That's coming too, and that, of course, healthcare costs are increasing. We have not talked about long-term care and how we fund that. That's going to be a big challenge. Again, it's a challenge today. It's going to be a greater challenge 30 years from now, especially because, as Connie mentioned at the beginning, we are living longer. Now, there's differences when you say for whom, and on average, because we had COVID and that kind of changed the demographics. But generally speaking, you can expect that we are going to live longer, and more of us will be living to age 100. And this is a big issue for women. So women are genetically superior to men. You get an extra several years of life.
Glad you noticed that.
Should I just stop there and go home because now I'm on a high note? This is very important when thinking about how you fund those later years in life, though. And again, this is a challenge. And so people talk about a retirement income crisis, and people want to argue whether it's a crisis or not. I'll just tell you, we definitely have a retirement income challenge. Whether or not you call it a crisis or not, I don't care, but it is a challenge. We've got to figure out a way to make sure that we have more protected income in retirement. And then real quick on Social Security, then I'll hand it over on workforce issues. You can claim Social Security retirement between 62 and 70. Anything before 70 is a penalty. So the full retirement age for me is 67. If I were supposed to get $1,000 a month in Social Security, if I claim at 62, it's $700. It's a 30% reduction on my monthly benefits for the rest of my life. If I delay until 70, I'd get about, I think it's $1,240, so a 24% increase. The difference between your age 62 and age 70 is a 77% difference. That is inflation protected for the rest of your life. The modal age of claiming right now is 62. We have to make sure we can help facilitate delayed claiming in some way, shape, or form. A lot of people can't afford to do it. We got to figure out how to have a stronger minimum benefit for those who can't work past 62, to figure out how we can help facilitate delayed claiming for those who can, at least until the full retirement age, if not longer. But these are the challenges that are going to affect today's 65-year-olds, those who are 10 years behind like me who are coming up, and of course the millennials who will bear the brunt of any major change we have to do to these programs.
Anyone else like to chime in here?
Okay. So longevity is the game changer, and I think it is right up there with climate change as a grand challenge. When you think of in 1935, when Social Security was enacted, life expectancy at birth was 70. So if you got to 62, 65, you only had a few years to kind of piece it together. Today, as you've heard, we've got 20 years to piece it together. And a lot of us are going to have to be working longer. And we were talking earlier, this workplace age discrimination is a huge issue with so many of us pushed out of the workforce in our 50s and unable to get back in. So it makes me wonder, what does a robust plus 50 strategy look like in the workplace? And I was discouraged when you said, I don't know that there are companies that you could think of that have one, but this is really where we need, I think, to be. What does it mean to leverage the talent of older workers? What does it mean to retain older workers, to reintegrate them into the workplace? Who are the pioneer companies in the US or globally that are leading on this? Because we can't, retirement is no longer this one-time, one-way exit. People are going to be working well into their 70s, and we're now not set up to do that.
Retirement has always been an intergenerational issue because forever before we had the retirement system, parents would age and children would be responsible for taking care of them. When children were not able to do that because of industrialization and the nature of jobs that they had, they weren't home anymore. We created the retirement system because we needed it so that people could take care of themselves. Still, when you get your Social Security check, when you sell your stock, when you receive your dividends on the stocks that you hold, you are receiving income from younger generations who are working. When you sell your house, you are receiving income from younger generations who are working. So no matter how we create our retirement system, it will remain an intergenerational issue. I talk to my students about this. They are young, college students, and when we talk about Social Security, the problem is that they often don't. So when in the class we start talking about Social Security, they get scared that, oh, do we have to pay more taxes? And I ask them, what's more scary, paying like 2%, 3% more higher taxes, or having to support your parents in retirement? And almost all of them prefer to pay higher taxes than. And that's true, because then they feel like, okay, I'm kind of like leaving this responsibility to other institutions to some extent. And I think that's how we should frame things. Like, it is regardless going to be an intergenerational issue, whether I save for my retirement personally, whether I pay more taxes now into Social Security, whether I invest in real estate and buy some houses, I will have to rely on a productive younger generation when I retire to buy my assets, to pay taxes, and to produce, to manufacture, and provide me with what I need. We have to make sure that that's going to happen. We have to make sure that our economy is growing, and we have to make sure that the benefits of this growth is equitably distributed among everyone.
So let's double click down on this topic, and we brought up women several times. There will be many more women in the retirement, in the boomer stage as we age. And more than half of the population is there today, and that will only grow. Yes, we are living a little bit longer. But I think when we start to think about women, women and men are very different when it comes to money. Recently, Equitable did a survey really looking at women relationships and their money. The confidence levels are different. The approach is different. We're solutions-oriented. Problem solvers, getting so much focused on what's in front of us today that often we avoid or delegate really the investment aspect of savings for retirement and things along those lines. So financial education becoming part of the dialogue. As a matter of fact, the survey indicated that 2/3 of women wished they had gotten involved earlier, taken the step, been part of the conversation, especially when they're in a coupled relationship where confidence is good until something changes. So I'd like to switch to women on two fronts. Number one, solutions and ways to engage women in the savings, in the narrative, but also to think about women as often the predominant caregivers as we age and as we hit that. And Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to read a statistic from the NCOA survey, which is 96% of women told us that they'd support a tax break for family caregiving, and 90% would support 12 weeks of paid family leave. So what do we have to start to think about to really think about the education, the engagement, and the topic of caregiver as a real profession, frankly?
So I think I'm also looking at just wage gaps. So for Black women, the wage gap costs Black women over a 40-year career $1 million. So $1 million that you could put a kid through school, you could buy a house, you could, childcare, et cetera. So there are systemic factors that are at play here that have nothing to do with the individual. I like to look at, not at the big policy level, but at, I'm dealing with sort of women in small groups hearing their stories. And, what we realize is if you're already in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, is that some of the policies that are being developed now are really for people in their 20s and 30s to avert a crisis for them. So in some ways, we feel like the cavalry's not coming for us, that the issues that we're facing, that we are figuring out on our own. And even though it should not be us, it is turning out to be us. And one of the things I talked about in my book is getting together what I call resilience circles, of having women come together to buy food together, to live together. This is really where we are while we're waiting for these policies. We see how things move through Congress. It's slow going. And there are all these people who are in the meantime. And so getting people, when I was going through what I was going through, in a resilience circle where somebody told me how to get a deferment on my mortgage. Somebody else, I helped her, she got the stair lift. It's going to come down to not just all the big policy stuff, which will not affect the populations that you're dealing with today. It is what can be done that they can do, that you can help them do. NCOA has the wonderful tool that tells you what resources you're eligible for. That kind of thing, I think, is really, for this population, as important as the policy things coming down the pike that may not be actually in place for another, 5 years or more.
Haleh, you've got, in your work, you've developed the longevity principles. How does that play into this conversation?
Yeah, no, we developed a set of 6 longevity principles to, one, help raise the profile on this issue, because I often feel that it gets kind of forgotten in the big landscape of things, and 2, to help create a framework of ways for policymakers, for business, for others, to talk about longevity. The first 2 are about financial resilience, 3rd one's about healthy aging, 4th one is about the multi-generational workforce, 5th one is about purpose and community, so we prevent this epidemic of loneliness, but the 6th one is my baby. And the 6th one is about retirement equity. And what it specifically looks at is women and different races and classes. And what we like to talk about is a triple threat against women, which is one, we are genetically superior, we do live longer, we live approximately 5 years longer, we make more money, that's a fact, and we are the ones who take time off for caregiving. I myself was one. I took 10 years off for caregiving. So that means I have less money in my retirement account. So it is really difficult to tackle all of these issues at the same time. I think we need to consider policies on caregiving. I think we need to address head-on that women make less money than men. I think there are many things that we need to address in this, but it needs to rise to the top. It also, on a personal level, I think just needs to be more part of the conversation, because when my dad died, my mom was a mess in a variety of ways, but so much financially. and not knowing what to do with things that I kind of do on a general basis, but she really kind of needed help in, again, to pay the bills and go to the bank and put things in her name and everything else. And those are difficult things that we don't really talk about. I love your idea of a resilience circle, communities of friends who can help kind of provide that for you. So I think the topic of equity, specifically for women, is really the top of the list of things we need to consider when we're talking about longevity and aging populations.
Thank you.
Can I add one thing to that, Connie? Because I think we haven't talked about this in our prep, but I think it's important.
Okay.
Because we don't know who's watching this tape recording later. So one of the interesting things I learned recently is that when a husband dies and the wife remains, the majority of them fire their financial advisor.
70%
There's the
file,
number.
and by the way, I'm one of them, and I knew better. 70%, and that comes down to trust, relationships, and not being enough engaged.
And this is where, for people who might be watching or financial advisors, please talk to the woman who's in the room as well. And this is
Inclusion is huge.
Inclusion is huge, and also we get more same-sex couples. But what also it means is there are not many women in financial services and the financial advisory realm. So we talk about getting women into STEM and minorities. We need to get also into financial services and financial advice. But that's very important because you're talking about your mother. They need to be part of the conversation early. It's the kitchen table conversations that start when you're working and going all the way through. And so that's important to think about that as well. I just wanted to get that out there.
I'm glad you brought that up because it is absolutely critical. You can't sit in the back seat. You can't become a silent partner or delegate. I delegated. Wrong. So with that,
I can never imagine you delegating anything.
I
Let's be clear.
did. So for our last question, this is one powerful organization. Look at you across this room and the impact that you all have on the millions. You are what amplifies and touches all of these people in every single community. But you're also the voices for policy. Tomorrow is Hill Day. And so in getting ready for Hill Day, Jason, I'd like to just simply frame what the big issues are and where we can best collectively make that impact.
Thank you. So I'll make this quick because I know people have other opinions. So again, I'm with the Bipartisan Policy Center. The Bipartisan Policy Center is the only organization registered in the District of Columbia with the word bipartisan in its name. That is both a supply and demand problem from an economist standpoint. And I know being in the middle of the road is the most dangerous place to stand because you can get hit by people going in both directions. Realize tomorrow when you go to Capitol Hill that members and staff are always inundated with everyone's pet projects. What we do have is a retirement income challenge. That should be the framing you talk to them about and say, what are you doing to help get this attention it deserves in the public sphere? The Social Security Trustees Report is a good example. For the last 30 years, we have known that the insolvency date is coming sometime between 2027 and 2042. 30 years. Have we done anything about it yet? No. People don't see that crisis being real, but we're now within a 10-year window. So I think tomorrow when you go up there, whether you're pushing for additional caregiving credits, whether you're talking about benefits, whether you're talking about long-term care, the idea is how do we get these issues out in the public sphere to have a reasonable, respectable discourse, debate, and conversation. Where's the safe space for us to do that? Because if they don't start doing it now, it's just going to be a lot harder when we get to there 9-10 years from now.
Thank you. So last 2 minutes, we're going to do a lightning round here. I'm going to go right down the line and best advice, best solution, best advice, because we promised solutions too. So Haleh, we're going to start with you. We go right down the line.
Okay, great. It's something that we've already kind of said here, but I say have the difficult conversations. Have the conversations that seem taboo, such as, Mom, do you have enough money saved up for retirement? Or questions on ageism, or any other tough questions out there. The other major kind of solution, I think, is something Elizabeth touched on, which is in our principles, Principle 5, focusing on community and purpose, is don't forget your friendships and your communities and however you make it. It is going to be critical as you get older, as you're leaving your job, as you're retiring. That could be as important as everything else.
And by the way, we will have those principles available for you along with other resources post-conference. So, Sia?
First of all, we should prioritize Social Security again. We can't say it enough. We should prioritize, strengthen, and expand Social Security if we can. Also, take a look at what's going on in Congress right now. As a result of years of our work in Schwartz Center with our friends at Economic Innovation Group on a plan that could address some of the issues that I talked about. There is a new legislation, Retirement Savings for Americans Act, RSAA. Take a look at that. That creates a more universal system, providing everyone with access, securing retirement savings, protecting them from early withdrawals and stuff like that. Take a look at that, see how that works.
Elizabeth.
So the title of my book is 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal. And the faking normal has to do with a lot of people that you're working with are pretending they're okay and they're not okay. There are people in your family right now. There are people in your friendship circle that you are seeing on a regular basis and they're not okay. Because in this culture, there's a lot of pressure on our individualism, and that we're all can do it on our own and by ourselves. And that, when there is a crisis of this magnitude, works against us on an individual basis. It means that the sort of robust demand that should be coming from this population on our legislature is not there. We're quiet. We're siloed when there is this problem of this magnitude. So look around your circles to see. See who used to be ordering a glass of wine when you took them to lunch and now they're getting mineral water. See whose tires look like they need to be changed. See who looks long between their hair appointments. There are lots of signs of what's happening to people on a real level, and then we don't have the conversations and people remain isolated.
Jason?
I'll do two quick ones, then we're out of time. The first one is a policy where if you start talking to the Hill tomorrow, we need to make sure we continue to reduce the barriers to getting more people access to defined contribution plans. Whether that's with a savings match, whether it's opening up so there's more people that are offering it so that people have access, because still about 1/3 of people in the private sector do not have access to a defined contribution plan. That's the first policy. The second thing that I'll leave you with is a call for action for all of you, and it sort of leads to what Haleh was talking about. People don't plan to fail, they fail to plan. Every one of you in this room can talk to somebody or more than one person and help have that important conversation about, have you thought about your retirement, have you thought about income, have you thought about how you're going to plan for things? We talk to your financial advisor. There are so many questions you can ask. Do you have a long-term care program? Do you have someone like a lawyer who can, for your estate? Do you have the healthcare directives? All those things are part of a plan. Help people start planning.
And I'm going to wrap it by saying it's never too late to have continuous learning. The role of financial education across all of this, meeting people where they are and bringing them along so that it's relevant. For women, it's often solutions-oriented, is part of getting people engaged and building confidence. And in the end, it is about building confidence in individuals to take a step, to talk, to go forward, and that's why we're all here. So I'd like to thank my wonderful panel. Can I put up the slide please, that has the list of resources for everyone? We will make sure these are available to you. So the studies we referenced today are all available to you, and I hope you take advantage of them. Elizabeth's book is fabulous. I took a look at it, and this was an engaging conversation. I'd like to thank this panel, and I'd like to thank all of you in the room so that we can all go out and amplify today's conversation now in the next session and beyond these doors. Thank you.